Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Tuesday afternoon. And Ben, this is my favorite time of year. This is when you're on the road. We got you outside, I think, outside of Chick-fil-A in Atlanta. Another busy day for you, and it's just to let you know we're in the middle of the summer when we get Ben in the car.
Well, yeah, it means it's 7-on-7 season, summer padded camp season. Going to be a lot of those types of things for me to get to over the next 2 months. But yeah, out at the Corky Kell 7-on-7 here today in Atlanta, and they've got a couple of these over the next 2 weeks. So I'll probably be there. Next week, there's a pretty good bet that I'll probably be in this exact same spot when we do this next week.
I'm going to be trying to match up the background when we record that episode. Kipp, how is this Tuesday treating you? It's hard to believe it, man. We're in June. The off season is just flying by.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. The weather continues to throw curveballs left and right. I managed to see the only dud of a start by Chris Sale in the last 5 weeks. And yeah, here we are. I mean, we're still talking about NCAA football coming out soon, what we're going to be doing with that. But, it feels like that game should have came out earlier, because now, we're already, just getting cranked up and preparing for next season. So we could have had this game come out in March and actually, had a much better timeline for wasting 8 to 12 hours of our day. But, at this point, we're already – making travel plans, trying to, get our weeks lined up for this upcoming season. The ESPN FPI came out, and we're looking to see which games are going to be the toughest, things like that. So I just feel like it feels late for us as content creators to be getting a game that we've been waiting on for a decade.
Kipp, if they told you that on top of the $70 that the standard edition is, that you could pay $100 extra on top of that and get it in the next 3 days, would you pay it or would you wait it out?
I think I would have paid $100. Not that I just have it lying around. If it would have been a month ago, if I could get it a month early, then you could. It's a blank check for everyone. But at this point, it's like the season. I've basically already played it in my mind. I've simulated, how the first couple of seasons are going to go recruiting wise. I've already lost half my roster to the transfer portal. I mean, I already kind of feel like I've put in time with this game just based on all the gameplay videos and reaction articles we've already had to it. So, I don't think I would do that now, but I'm just ready for it to get here, man. I don't want to see how if it's not Madden, I want them to prove it to me, and I want to be able to get angry at this game, at all the things that aren't realistic about it, that I would have had my mind blown a decade ago if it had come out.
Ben, same question to you. Would you pay an extra $100 to get it the next couple days?
Absolutely, yeah. I wouldn't even hesitate. Are you kidding me? Especially if I knew that I'd be the only one getting it, so I could flex on everybody that I was getting to do it.
Imagine, we're all here for the content. We're going to be writing hey, here's the depth. I mean, those stories would just do killer. You're the only one with the game. Oh my God, it'd be incredible.
I mean, I know there were some people that got access to be able to do some of those gameplay breakdowns and things like that. But I mean, if you could go right now and basically just outline exactly what the Georgia football team is going to look like in that game, I mean, our readers would eat that up.
Well, guys, let's look forward to what the Georgia football team may look like in 2025 and beyond. This has been some very big recruiting weekends the past couple weekends. And let's start with this past one. We did a deep dive on last week's episode about who was coming to town, what we were looking for. Ben, what did you learn about this group of visitors this past weekend? And, especially with a few days removed from it now, is there anything that really stands out to you about the weekend?
Absolutely. Well, I think you bring up a good point in that question, a few days removed. And I think if you're even a few days more removed than we are right now, there's probably even more conversations that have had with Georgia coaches and reactions and, things like that. But I'm going to sort of segment it off among, there were sort of 3 buckets that I put Georgia recruits into last weekend. There was the uncommitted guys that are still, keeping their options open for everyone. There were 2 guys that were committed to USC, and then there were a bunch of guys that were committed to Georgia already. And so I'm going to kind of bucket off those so that we can, go through each of them. But in the uncommitted side of things, I mean, again, everybody wants there to be public commitments after these weekends. They want all of the news, and I wouldn't rule out that there could be, some things happen here in the next week or so with some of these guys. But I think by and large, Georgia had the, important business type of conversations that they needed to have with these May 31st to June 2nd official visitors. And for the most part, I would say it was very positive outcomes. I mean, you look at guys like 5-star linebacker Zayden Walker. You look at 4-star wide receivers Talon Taylor and Travis Smith Jr. You
Ben is speechless. Kipp, while we wait on getting Ben back, was there anything that stood out to you about this group and what we learned, and if there was anything in particular that stood out to you from this past weekend?
I think it was a foundational weekend. Obviously, Ben's going to have a lot more on the young committed guys, but I think you saw Georgia gain a lot of momentum with a lot of the top targets where they kind of needed to. With Zayden Walker, like where Georgia stands there, I think he's a guy that they've kind of been building momentum for a while. He's kind of been projected to Georgia for a while, and I don't think anything's changed there, which is great news for Georgia. And as well as, the wide receivers, Talon Taylor, Travis Smith. Those are guys that Georgia has had momentum with throughout the spring. Big time pass catching targets for Georgia this cycle. Both of them projected to Georgia right now, by most of the industry, myself included. I think you're talking about guys that could be, joining the class soon. I think Talon Taylor is one of those guys where I would say that I don't think his recruitment's going to last a lot longer. Travis Smith, obviously, he's announcing his commitment next month. I believe it's July 13th, but he's going to be a guy that is more than likely going to join Georgia's class. So that's huge. Getting their second and third receiver in a cycle where we said they need to load up. They probably will sign, I would say 4, maybe 5, but 4 wide receivers is probably where things go right now. And then Juan Gaston and Nick Brooks, a couple of massive offensive tackles. Juan Gaston from Westlake. Nick Brooks was in Georgia. He's back in Iowa now. And they're both basically the exact same size, 6'7", over 340 pounds. That's like a Stacey Searle special right there. I mean, I think for him, he's basically loading up on a pair of potential bookend tackles in this class. I love where Georgia stands with both those guys. I think with Nick Brooks, it's been, the momentum's been building since he decommitted a couple months ago. I think Georgia's kind of been the school that's kind of been moving to the forefront of his recruitment. And I like where the Dogs sit at this time. And I think overall, you look at that group, that's an outstanding group to maintain your momentum with. But I think really for me, the guy that I mentioned in my write-up last week that I wanted to see Georgia gain some momentum with, just because I think that he's an elite safety prospect in this class, and that's Lagonza Hayward from Toombs County here in Georgia. Tennessee had been the team to beat for a long time. Georgia's cranked up the heat in his recruitment in the last couple of months, and I think that is where, if you're looking for what changed this weekend, I think that's the recruitment that I had my eye on, and now it does seem like Georgia has some momentum. They flipped the script in his recruitment, and now it's going to be, whether or not Tennessee can try to regain momentum. But as of now, I like where Georgia stands, and I think, you got those South Georgia DBs. You load up on those guys any chance you can get. And I think he's kind of that next one in this class that if Georgia can add him, they should be really happy, because I just love what he does. But he's a two-way star and really does everything that his teams ask him to do. And those are the kind of guys every single cycle, you look and they might not be rated in the top 20, top 30, but I'll put Lagonza Hayward up against any DB in this class as far as just a guy that you just line him up in the secondary. He'll do whatever you need him to. He's an incredible wide receiver as well. I love that guy that has ball skills. So I just think that overall this weekend is going to be a foundational one. If they're able to flip, a pair of USC commits, I think that's kind of where everyone's kind of watching. Can they get a couple D linemen in this class? 5-star Justice Terry, 5-star edge Isaiah Gibson. I like where Georgia kind of stands with both of them, but I don't think it's a situation where you might not hear news anytime soon. It's just one of those where I think that they have continued to build momentum. They're going to continue to get those guys on campus. And I think this is one of those visit weekends where, down the road when you're looking at this class, you could say, that they added 5-6 commitments to their class and added a huge bulk of their class from this visit weekend.
I wanted to make sure and point out there was a picture of Nick Brooks with Stacey Searles and Kirby Smart. It looked like Kirby was doing the quiet. And my favorite thing of being on a message board, being on the Junkyard, is all the theories. Oh, he's a silent commit. That's what that means. He's a silent commit. You come up with anything. But we're going to bring Ben back on here, and let's see if we can get him back. And Ben, you kind of got cut off there in your explanation. But just tell us what stood out to you out of this past weekend.
Yeah, my phone overheated, so I apologize. And now I'm sitting in a parking lot. I've got someone that decided to change clothes, literally sitting in the car right next to me. So I apologize about that. All right, so I think where I got cut off was 4-star wide receiver Talon Taylor, 4-star wide receiver Travis Smith Jr., the 4-star offensive linemen that were in town. I mean, Nick Brooks, you just mentioned him there, Jordan. Juan Gaston. I mean, those are all guys that I have heard very positive feedback on in terms of how Georgia fared this weekend and, sort of foreshadowing what you maybe should expect from all of them as the summer goes on. I think to Kipp's point, the bigger question with some of these guys is not how did Georgia do with them, is, when are these decisions actually going to be made? And I had one person that I talked to after the weekend that was like, I think we did really well with X, Y, and Z guys, but they're all going to take their visits, just kind of a sign of the times. And that's just the day that we're in. It's like, guys, they might have told Georgia coaches, yeah, I want to come to Georgia, but there's a lot of reasons why you want to still take these other summer official visits. And so I think all those guys that I just named right there, Georgia's trending well for. And, I don't think Georgia has too many concerns necessarily about these upcoming visits, but they're keeping an eye on them. A couple guys coming into the weekend that I was more curious about, like how is this going to turn, or what is it going to look like? One, Kipp brought it up, Lagonza Hayward. I mean, this is a guy that's been in both of my mock classes, mainly because he's a South Georgia DB that I have thought very highly of from a talent standpoint. And I just think, straight up, that has been more tea leaf based than intel based, in that I typically think that the best South Georgia defensive backs tend to end up at Georgia. That's just the way that it goes in the Kirby Smart era. You saw it with DeMello Jones a year ago, where Georgia wasn't really recruiting him. They were kind of slow on him. I realized they were later on Lagonza really than they were on DeMello, even though Lagonza was a more established prospect. But once Georgia got involved, it kind of, the tide turned in that recruitment. And I think something similar sort of happened with Lagonza. I mean, he didn't have relationships really with Georgia prior to Dante Williams, and especially Travaris Robinson coming on staff. Those two, led by T-Rob, have done a really, really good job with him so far. And I think coming into the weekend, he probably hadn't seen himself as a Georgia Bulldog yet. I think coming out of the weekend, there is a very strong case that ends up happening. Now, he's not going to decide immediately. He's got Tennessee visit. He's got a couple other schools that are going to probably start coming after him a little bit harder, much like Georgia did this past weekend. But again, that's just one that I feel more confidently about him in my mock classes than I ever had. And I think that, that has a lot to do with, how this weekend went. And then the other one was Michael Carroll. That was another 6'7" plus, 330 pound plus offensive lineman, the type that Georgia hosts on these first official visit weekends of June. I mean, you look back at the last two recruiting cycles. They brought in, that first weekend, they brought in Daniel Calhoun. They brought in Marquise Easley. You look at this year, they brought in Nick Brooks. They brought in Juan Gaston, and they brought in Michael Carroll. All five of those guys, you set them side by side and put them in Georgia photo shoot gear, you might not be able to tell who's who. And the reason I say that is because Nick Brooks and Juan Gaston were both wearing 73 in a few photos, and I was having trouble differentiating which one was which. And Michael Carroll is right along that same type of guy. Again, newer, Georgia wasn't He wasn't a name super linked to Georgia before the official visit got scheduled. Stacey Searles went up to go see him in Pennsylvania earlier this year. He's someone that I think, the narrative was that Georgia was coming from.
Gosh, I need to know what this narrative is. I'm on the
Love
edge of my seat here.
I love recording stuff live. That is definitely a great sign. While we wait on Ben and maybe make a call on what's going to happen next, Kipp, I was really intrigued by the fact that Ryan Montgomery was such a presence there. Having the commit, having him on board, and having a chance to get to know some of the other recruits. Yeah, that's a very good question from Craig Lawson, who said, is Wolk's license suspended? If you'll listen, his car is not running. He's just sitting in it. So I don't know what he's going to do next. But how big do you feel like that was, that Ryan Montgomery was there and was able to get to know some of these guys? I'm sure he was in their ear saying, hey, come join me. Let's go to Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, it helps on multiple levels. You obviously have your pair of tight ends and Ethan Barber and Elias Williams. I mean, Florida State's just itching to get Elias Williams back on campus. Ethan's also getting recruited by Auburn. They're trying to get him back on campus. And then, your pass catchers as well. I mean, you're trying to reel in a couple of elite talents, like I said, and Taylor and Travis Smith. Now they could sell them on. We have an Elite 11 invite at quarterback committed in this class whose stock has continued to skyrocket since he committed to Georgia. Is now pushing for top 10 quarterback in the country. We're not going anywhere. And you see what we've done with Carson Beck. We're going to continue to have a dynamic passing game. And so I think that really helps. The quarterbacks are always tasked with kind of being that Pied Piper of a recruiting class. At the same time, when they get on official visits, especially now with the way it's structured with double-digit guys on campus, they have to split these guys up into groups. So you're not going to have Ryan Montgomery spending, a lot of time with Zayden Walker or Isaiah Gibson. They're going to go into their offensive and defensive groups. That way they can also split the official visits up and have Kirby Smart have time with this group and then this group. You have to stagger everything. But as far as the offensive guys, obviously, yes, it helps just to know, even if you're an offensive lineman, you want to be protecting, a quarterback who's not going to hold the ball too long or be lost out there. You want to know that you're going to play in, what should be a productive offense for years to come. And so I think that was obviously good for Georgia. And I think it was great for Ryan Montgomery as well, because now he knows, Georgia's not just going to, recruit, I'll just be honest, a bunch of slappies that have to go out there, and I'm just having to, make chicken salad out of Vegemite out here. So I think, again, I think for him, it probably reinforces, hey, this is where I wanted to be. And they laid out the red carpet, and it looks like, everything is built really well for Georgia's offense moving forward and overall Georgia's class. I'd love to get Ben's take on this, but it's not like it's a big recruiting weekend to wrap up that he is bailing on me here. But I'm looking at this class and I'm trying to set an over-under on overall how many guys is Georgia going to sign out of this class. And Ben had an awesome piece a couple weeks ago, kind of breaking down Georgia's their hit rate each week of the for the official visits. I would recommend anyone going to check that article out if you haven't seen it. It's titled "Analyzing the Change in Georgia's Hit Rate and Blue Chip Ratio of Summer Official Visits Year Over Year." But I think when you look at this group, I would probably set the over/under at 12.5 out of 15 on how many guys sign with Georgia in this group, because they have, as of right now on June 4th, they have a lot of momentum, even with the guys that are committed to the USC. Like I said, with Justice Terry and Isaiah Gibson, I think Georgia, even though they're verbally committed to another program, Georgia's got the momentum with both those guys right now. And so it's going to be up to the Trojans to try to get them back on campus and undo some of that. But I mean, Georgia's probably going to get these guys on campus again. And if they have their 7-on-7 teams in the, the Kirby Smart 7-on-7 in the coming weeks, then they'll probably get them on campus this month. That would not surprise me at all. And so I think you look at this group, and if Georgia signs, let's just say 28 guys, then you could look, almost half of the class could come from this first weekend. We'll see how things go. There's obviously twists and turns, but just looking at the group overall right now, I think that they've got a chance to sign double-digit guys from their group. And if you sign, let's just put it on the under. If you sign 12 out of 15 guys, you had your first weekend. It was a huge first weekend for Georgia. I think they probably signed 13. I'd probably take the over on it. That's just how strong of a group and how much momentum they got from this group. So I think moving forward, this is going to kind of be the way that Georgia schedules that first weekend. But then, next weekend's just as big. I think they are going to end up having, as of now, it's 14 guys scheduled on official visits. But this is kind of that there's going to be a lot of big swings in that next group. When you have linebacker Tavion Wallace, who's going to be announcing soon from Wayne County, an elite linebacker, top 40 prospect in the country. That's a guy that, Glenn Schumann's definitely going to want to get on board. And then, the headliner is going to be David Sanders for sure. The number one offensive tackle in the country. That one's one where Georgia had some momentum earlier on in the recruitment. And, now they're just having a battle with a lot of other programs right now, whether it's Clemson. I think Alabama and Ohio State are in there as well. But, you're battling Clemson for a guy in North Carolina that Stacey Searles has had a relationship for multiple years. And I think that's kind of that big, swing for him to see if he can land that type of player once again, in back-to-back classes and kind of build a huge offensive line haul, because that has been the focus the last couple of cycles for Georgia, is getting back to the line of scrimmage. And obviously he's going to be the big star power next weekend.
Third time is the charm with Ben Wolk. Ben, be honest. You just wanted a Chick-fil-A milkshake, didn't you?
Yeah, I realized that I needed a little bit of a pick-me-up after that salad that I had, so I needed some extra calories. You should have. I hope that you guys didn't catch the F-bomb that I dropped when my temperature heated all the way up and I went off again. So luckily we kept it PG for everybody. But I don't even know where I was this time. I think that I was probably talking about Michael Carroll and how I think that Georgia, it reminded me, and I wrote about this last week too, like it reminded me of Michael Uni's recruitment a little bit, where it was like, here's this 6'8" guy that Georgia's clearly been recruiting and Stacey Searles has gone to see, and it feels like some other teams maybe are in the driver's seat for him. But, in Michael Uni's case, he came on that Georgia visit and was pretty certain after leaving that he was going to choose Georgia, even though coming in, everyone was saying Michigan and Alabama. And I think Michael Carroll had a similar situation play out. I wouldn't go as far as to say, like, I think that he's a shoo-in to be in Georgia's class, but I think that there was a lot of, Georgia's way behind. Georgia has to, really prove it this weekend, and Georgia certainly did. I think that all three of those offensive linemen, Nick Brooks, Juan Gaston, Michael Carroll, Georgia feels pretty good about how things went. I would probably lean more towards Nick Brooks and Juan Gaston signing with Georgia at this exact point in time, but I think that Georgia did everything that it could do to make a strong case for Michael Carroll. And so I think that's the general rundown of the uncommitted guys. It only took us 23 minutes for me to get through my rundown of the uncommitted guys.
Kipp, did you have a question you were wanting to ask Ben about the guys on this visit and how this might play out?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to calmly put you on the spot and say over under on guys Georgia signs from this past weekend. I got it at 12.5 out of 15.
I think that might have been the number that I put when someone asked about it last week too. I think I would probably go over at this point. And I think that the reason why I would say over is, like, obviously there were 5 guys committed. There were a few guys coming in that we've already mentioned that I think that were already trending Georgia's way. So, look at 8 or 9 guys maybe. I think that, like, Lagonza Hayward was someone that I think was a little bit of a question mark. Nick Brooks was one that I think has been, he was in my first mock, out of my second mock, probably would be back in my third mock if I was doing it today. And so I think there were a couple that swung back in the right direction for Georgia. But I think that 12.5 number, I think, is a good number. And I think a lot of the turning point, and I'm sure you all talked about this when I was, WWE tag teaming my way back in and out of this call, but the USC commits are the ones that are really interesting to me. I mean, I know that Georgia obviously really desperately wants to get Justice Terry back into the fold. There's a reason why they wanted him in the first place. He's one of the best defensive linemen in the country. I think that they did a really, really good job this weekend and on his G-Day visit earlier this spring when he came for multiple days on both of those trips. I think that Georgia is doing everything they can to move that one back, in the right direction. The Isaiah Gibson one, it honestly sort of just depends who I talk to in this one. Like I've gotten some feedback that has been, the USC thing might be a little bit more solid than they thought, that there are a handful of other schools that are involved in this. So it's not just a strictly Georgia versus USC recruiting battle that's going on. That was mostly what I was hearing coming out of the visit on Sunday. And so, I mean, you saw Georgia offered Julius Hawley. I wrote about him at Dawgs 24/7 yesterday. Like, that was a guy that Georgia offered coming off of a camp, someone in state that I could see Georgia pushing for if they feel like things aren't trending the right way with Isaiah Gibson, or they feel like, he maybe is going to take longer than they're comfortable with. I think for Isaiah Gibson, a lot of it, he's had conversations with Georgia coming off of these official visits. And I think that that's maybe, made Georgia feel a little bit more strongly about their chances of flipping him back. But both of those are wait and see recruitments. Like, recruiting's crazy. You never know. Coming off of weekends like that, you really never know. But both of those are ones that I think, even if they were to flip them, you're going to have to battle until signing day for them, just because of the nature of those types of recruitments. And so those two probably end up tipping the over or under 12.5, if I were to guess.
We're going to take a quick and well-deserved break real quick, and then we're going to come back and talk about the weekend to come and talk about a few other things going on around Georgia. Ben, looking forward to this weekend. Again, this is a very busy time of year for Kirby Smart and company. We're expecting a lot of recruits in town once again. What can you tell us about this upcoming weekend and what the folks should know as we get ready for another busy weekend in Athens?
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, it's back-to-back weekends that are, I think Kipp said it last week, like this week, like the last week's official visit list was as stacked, star-studded, loaded, whatever terminology you want to use that you see in recruiting headlines all the time to describe what Georgia had. That's what it was last weekend. This is just a replica version of that. And I think, not to sidetrack from talking about the weekend, but I think one of the things that kind of fascinated me when I went and did my deep dive looking back at the last two summers and how they've attacked the official visit weekends. And, we point to that first weekend of June or May or end of May, just depending on how the dates line up, as the big premier visitor weekend. And that obviously has been the case. I think it tends to be guys that are committed, guys that are leans, maybe guys that they know they really, really want, and they need to take that one last Hail Mary stab at, whatever that looks like. Like, I think that's what that first weekend's looking like. But I found it very interesting that the last 2 years, guys that visit that second weekend of June, they have a 60% hit rate with. I think it's like 61%, not, if we're splitting hairs. And I think it surprised me when I started to dive into the numbers on that they had signed as many of the guys that weekend as they had. And I mean, when you look at this upcoming weekend, it's not surprising because it's a list of a bunch of guys that Georgia really, really, really wants. And I mean, you mentioned David, 5-star, offensive lineman David Sanders is going to be the headliner anywhere that he goes. I think that at points in the summer, there were questions, would David Sanders even make it to the Georgia official visit because he was in Clemson the weekend before and Clemson was trending so well. That has shifted in such a way that I think that Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio State are feeling, each are feeling pretty good about their respective chances. And now you're getting into that 3-week stretch where he's going to those places. And, I think we're going to find out here in the next 3 weeks where one of the best offensive linemen in the country really, where he's trending. And I think that Georgia's done a really good job getting him on campus for the scavenger hunt a couple of weeks ago, getting him back on campus for this official visit. That's going to be a big one. But a lot of interesting official visitors. I mean, a guy from Georgia, Todd Robinson, is someone that, I would put in a Georgia class right now. I think that Georgia's done a really good job here. He worked out last week, and he was not a typical, we got to work you out to see if you've got a spot here. This was we got to work you out to figure out where we want to put you, because he could play running back at Georgia. He could play receiver at Georgia. He could play defensive back in Georgia. And I think coming out of that camp, he's most likely to play defensive back. He worked out with Travaris Robinson during that camp. He's wired in a way where you mostly hear guys work the other way where, hey, I can play offense or I can play defense. I want to play offense because, that's where things are a little bit easier that way. He's a guy that wants to play defense, and I think that Georgia likes the fact that he wants to play defense. I think that them working him out at DB gave them an idea of, all right, is he someone that we actually would want to take as a safety? And the answer to that, I think, is resoundingly yes. So he's someone that I'm really intrigued by, how this weekend goes. But, Kipp mentioned earlier, Tavion Wallace, linebacker from Georgia. Again, that's another one of those where I think the narrative right now is sort of Florida State, Florida's in there, Georgia is maybe playing catch up. I think that it really is a 3-team race heading into all of this. You do not sleep on Glenn Schumann. I think that there's a reason why he wanted to have Zayden Walker last weekend, that he's got Tavion Wallace this weekend, as well as Ty Jackson this weekend. I think that those are probably the 3 linebackers that he wants most among the uncommitted guys. And so get them in early, find out how are things going. Do we need to circle back on some other guys? Do you want in the class? I think that you can sort of see their priority level and why those 2 linebackers are in town this weekend. We've talked a lot about wide receivers. We've talked about Thomas Blackshear committing. We've talked about Talon Taylor and Travis Smith this past weekend. In the mid-May official visit weekend, there were a couple of receivers that officially visited. There will be another one, Derek Meadows from Las Vegas. I'm fascinated by him just because he's 6'5", 230. He looks totally different than all the other wide receivers do. He really blew up this spring through the 7-on-7 circuit, even though he was known before then. But I think that's when the SEC teams really got into the mix. He's not someone that I think Georgia is, in the driver's seat for, or that I would lean toward Georgia landing him at this time. But I think that these weekends are always fascinating where it turns. I don't think that, again, Lagonza Hayward is not someone that I think that a lot of folks would have thought that coming out of last weekend that all of the buzz was about Georgia and Lagonza Hayward. And I think that that's what's fascinating about these weekends, especially these first 2 weekends of the month, where if you're visiting one of these first 2 weekends, Georgia really, you're really high on Georgia's board because they are emphasizing getting you in one of those first 2 weekends. Eric, we've talked a little bit about DBs, and DB is a position group where I'm probably a little bit lost in terms of how is that materializing? I mean, again, new coaches, new board, new relationships, just all sorts of these different things. I think it started to figure itself out. I think we saw that with Lagonza Hayward last weekend. I think that Eric Winters is someone that's been around for a while, and he's had a pre-existing relationship with Glenn Schumann that I think helps out here. But he'll be visiting this weekend, as well as his high school teammate, Andrew Purcell, who recently picked up an offer. Again, I bring those 2 guys up because they were in my most recent mock class. I wouldn't say that it was my most confident additions to the mock class, but it's 2 guys that, I think Georgia, Auburn are really in the thick of things for. Miami is another team that's involved there. And so I think those are 2 guys that Georgia really, really wants, and that I could see them really picking up, the pace for going into this weekend as well. I'm sure that I left off a few guys because I think there's 14 or 15 guys that are going to be there this weekend. So pick up my slack wherever I missed it.
It's a good rundown for sure, Ben. Kipp, is there anyone either that Ben mentioned or that he didn't mention that you're particularly interested in seeing what we hear out of this weekend, and someone you want to see, how things shake out once they visit Athens?
I mean, first off, if those trends continue and Georgia has a let's just say 50% hit rate this next weekend, that's going to throw chaos into any mocks and projections for this class, because I mean, I would say as of right now, hard pressed to project two guys to Georgia maybe from this group. And so for next week, it's kind of the know where we stand week. I think Georgia wants to know where they stand with a lot of guys. I mean, as has been said, you can't say for sure where a DJ Pickett or a Eric Winters is on the safety board, or even like Jared Smith at edge. I think that Ben brought up a fascinating aspect of trying to flip the two USC commits is that if you're recruiting Justice Terry and Isaiah Gibson, you might have to be in for the long haul, which means you got to make decisions on how you're going to recruit other guys for those same spots, how long you're willing to wait on those guys. Are you willing to wait till the end of the cycle on those guys? Do you take someone else? But for next week, that's where I think that Georgia just wants to know exactly where they stand with some of these targets. Like, you want to know, are you a legitimate contender for David Sanders, or are you going to be in there until his decision? Or because again, June, they just had a couple offensive tackles on campus. They're going to have more, and those guys are taking visits to other programs, and so this is decision timelines are coming up. That's the way it is now. So Georgia's probably going to want to feel pretty confidently about whether they are in the top 2, top 3 for David Sanders, or if they're 1 for Tavion Wallace, if they're 4th. Do we have a legit chance with Derek Meadows? Or are we going to get Ty Jackson? Those are decisions that I think they want to come out on Sunday, and when those guys are done talking to Kirby Smart and they gather up, they want to be able to have their meeting and say, I feel these are the guys we're still in it. These are the guys that probably are headed elsewhere. And that's just how this next week's going to go. So again, 50% hit rate. If they get 5 or 6 of these guys out next weekend, I just think like the board's going to change dramatically, or will have already changed by the time we record this show next week.
Wanted to make sure we talked about some big scheduling news that we heard last Thursday. We haven't had a podcast since then. Clean old-fashioned hate is moving to Black Friday. It is going to be played one day earlier than was initially scheduled. That game is going to be in prime time on ABC. Part of 2 really big SEC games on Black Friday. The Egg Bowl between Ole Miss and Mississippi State is going to be played a little bit earlier that afternoon. Kipp, I'm going to start with you. What's your reaction? Do you like this move to Black Friday? Any thoughts on the schedule change?
Yeah, obviously, I think Georgia Tech's probably excited about it because they get, they get more exposure. Georgia doesn't really have an issue with that, but it's always, I think, when you're battling some of the other games on rivalry weekend, it's probably good to have your own spot. I would imagine that Kirby's probably pretty excited because usually there's a pretty big game that comes after the Georgia Tech game, and often Georgia is playing in that game, at least under Kirby Smart. So the earlier you can finish up with Georgia Tech and prepare for potentially another opponent, the better it is. I know a lot of people don't like any change at all, and I get it. But I mean, I think it's great for this rivalry because in an era where you're losing a lot of tradition left and right, I think this would be a great tradition to start. To always have this game, this exact time slot, this exact day, make that a tradition in a rivalry that kind of grown a little stale over the last 10, 15 years. Since Paul Johnson was there, it hasn't really had that same, just it might not get it again, but just the same, I don't know, the hatred is always going to be there, but people don't talk about it as much. Now, I mean, they're going to be front and center. Everyone's going to be talking about this game regardless. So I know Georgia fans don't want it to become any more even. They're fine with it being lopsided for the most part. But I just think having a more unique approach to this rivalry, I just think it's great for college football, and it should be great for Georgia fans as well.
Personally, I'm really excited by this move. I will say, when I got the alert from the Ross Dellinger story, I saw it was moving, and my immediate reaction was, "Oh my God, it's going to Thanksgiving." and like my heart just sank. I was like, oh my God. And then to see it was Black Friday. I mean, for me personally, as someone who likes watching college football, I'm a fan of it. One, especially for us, that cover these teams, that travel with these teams, by the end of the year, man, if you can give me this game a day earlier, that's going to help out a ton. And it opens the door for us to watch more games as well. Between the Iron Bowl, between games like Michigan and Ohio State and Florida State, that sort of opens up the end of the regular season if you want to watch more football. I think, too, that I'd have to imagine that Georgia's not upset about this. One, it's another night game in Sanford Stadium, albeit not on a Saturday night. It's an opportunity for them to get a head start on if they're getting ready for the SEC championship game, that they have got this game taken care of a day earlier and maybe can at least get a day of rest, if nothing else, before they really jump in. And now, too, guys, think about the December signing period is going to be moved up. I think that's going to just help as far as just scheduling out what's going to be a super busy week. Again, if Georgia's playing in this SEC title game, I don't think if you're a Georgia fan, I can understand not wanting to change things. But personally, if you gave me the two options, one, play in primetime on Friday or kickoff at noon on Saturday, I'm picking Friday night and not thinking twice about it. Ben, what do you think of the move? And just as someone who's a college football fan, are you for making a change like this?
Well, I think I did probably what a lot of people did when they saw it. They were like, "Oh, a college football game on a Friday night, like Georgia doesn't do that." But the more I thought about it, I mean, I'm excited for that environment, like a Friday night in Sanford Stadium. I mean, if I know Georgia fans, like I think I do, like I think they're going to make that regardless of the caliber of either of the two teams. I think they're going to make that one of the rowdier environments that has been in Sanford Stadium in recent memory. So I think that'll be fun just to, experience a Friday night in Sanford, something that's a little bit different. I think, when you think about the Egg Bowl and some of those other Thanksgiving week games, like having that breakout element to that week has some value to it, just because, I mean, I can think of years and years of watching Egg Bowl games that were, to many people meaningless because of the records that they had. But that's what I do Thanksgiving week, And so if Georgia and Georgia Tech gets to a point where there is some traditional aspect to this, where all right, the Black Friday night game, that's going to be Georgia Tech. Like I think that would make it even more appealing because it just makes it sort of part of the experience or whatever. To your point, Jordan, obviously the ability, I think, for Georgia fans or those of us that cover it to be able to have Saturday to not have to sweat about a Georgia game, assuming that they won on Friday night. If they lost on Friday night, then I think that the Saturday feeling is totally different. But you get to sit there and you enjoy Saturday and watch a bunch of these games that maybe you don't always get to watch because you're busy watching the Georgia Tech game on that Saturday. I think that element of it is really cool. And then, everyone's going to bring it up from now until that Friday, but Georgia's got to bring out black jerseys for that game regardless.
Since you brought it up and I was prepared to do this, how much money would I have to give you for you to get you to ask Kirby if they're going to wear black uniforms the next time we get them?
Sometimes I'm a little rascal, Jordan. You might be able to get me to do that for free if I'm feeling a certain type of way someday.
Well, guys, let's talk about something else that's going to be going on this weekend. Georgia baseball. I don't know everyone who is listening and watching if you guys checked it out this past weekend. Super exciting stuff for Georgia baseball. Took care of Army, UNC, Wilmington, and then Georgia Tech in extra innings. Moving on to the Super Regionals for the first time since 2008. They are going to be hosting NC State this upcoming weekend. Georgia's a 7th seed nationally, and NC State is a 10 seed. Those games will be Saturday and Sunday, 12 o'clock on ESPNU. If they split those first two games, there will be a third deciding game on Monday, time to be determined. Ben, did you get a chance to watch some of that action this past weekend? And hey, I mean, what can we say about the job Wes Johnson's done to be in this position where if they win 2 games, they're headed to Omaha?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to beat this Georgia baseball team because you saw it multiple times with multiple teams. I mean, Army thought they had them beat. Georgia Tech thought they had them beat. It's tough to beat this team because they can hit 1 through 9. I mean, when you've got a 9-hitter that leads the country in grand slams in a season, there's not really a safe spot in the lineup. And so It'll be interesting. I think the North Carolina State's a really good team. I do find it interesting. There's been a lot of crossover opponents between Georgia's schedule and North Carolina State's schedule, and I think that Georgia comes up on the more favorable side of that when you do the deep dive on that. Now, that doesn't mean anything for this series, obviously, but I think that at this point, it's crazy to think that we might be talking about Georgia in Omaha, and they're 2 wins away from being there, and they've got home games to be able to do it. So, fascinating for this to happen in year one. It helps when you've got the best player in college baseball, the best baseball prospect in the world. That definitely is a help. I want to shout out Corey Collins because everyone makes a big deal out of Charlie Condon, obviously 1-1 home run leader, all these things. And it's just not just Collins, but he was so clutch in so many moments throughout last weekend. And you could tell he did the SEC Network interview after the game, and he started to get choked up about it. And he even stopped his response. And he eventually said, the supers, this is what it was all about for all the older guys that have been around. They've seen the not so great days of Georgia baseball, and then being able to experience this in such short order under the new regime. I think that it mattered. You could tell how much it mattered to him. And again, I just think because so much has been made of Condon throughout the year, Collins hasn't necessarily gotten as much love. And this past weekend, I think that he was, I don't know if they gave out MVP or how that worked, but I think that he was the best player or the most important player for Georgia at the regional this past weekend.
Yeah, if you have not seen that interview with Corey Collins, I really recommend you go look it up. I mean, that's a guy, you could tell how much it meant to him, and that was super cool to see. And I mean, I'd shout out too, really the Georgia Tech game was the only one that I pretty much watched from start to finish. But, they got down 5-2, and it was some of the guys at the bottom of the lineup that really got them back into the game. I know a solo shot, I think in the 8th inning, was might have been the 9-hole hitter. I mean, it was not Charlie Condon. It was not one of the guys you expect. So it was a total team effort. And again, kudos to them. I think that there was some hesitation at the end of that Georgia Tech game of we can't burn through all our pitchers. We may have to play another game on Monday. And they got through it. It wasn't pretty. I mean, there was a play with the bases loaded in the 9th inning that, the reliever had to slide to touch first base and barely caught the ball. I mean, it looked like something that you would expect from a Little League game. I mean, it was very close to disaster, but hey, man, they found a way to do it, and they deserve a ton of credit. And I'm going to be there for this series. I'm looking forward to actually covering this. I couldn't tell you the last time I covered a game. I was probably in college. But that is super exciting and really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be an outstanding atmosphere. And we talked about it last weekend. I'm sure we'll probably see Kirby Smart around, may see some of those recruits getting to take it in as well. Kipp, do you have any thoughts just on what Georgia baseball's done? And again, I mean, the fact that they're hosting super regionals and have a chance to do something really special.
Isn't this who they played last time? Did they play NC State last time? Was that the Russell Wilson days? There were 8 or 9 draft picks on that team for NC State. I think it's fascinating that there's only 2 of these regionals that have hosts playing against each other, and obviously this is one of them. When you see other matchups, I think Tennessee's got Evansville, and even the winner of this series. The only other game is Kentucky, Oregon State, I think. And so that's the only other one between 2 regional hosts. And so the winner of this series will play the winner of that series. So this feels like this bracket got kind of ratcheted up a couple notches there as far as just the elite teams that are still in play. I think, it was probably nerve-wracking for fans to watch that series, but props to the bullpen. You talk about saving arms, but those last 2 games, I think they were asked to pitch 9 innings, and they gave up 1 earned run in those 2 games. So I think that's obviously going to be a big factor in this game because these guys, they've got one of the top RPIs left in this thing in the of all the teams left. NC State. I think that Finley's going to, you just need a huge weekend out of him, Colton as well. The pitching is just going to matter more and more each level you get. Obviously, Georgia's going to be able to bash for the best of them, but you're facing a guy, I think, if they put out Ryan Marone out there. He's got a 3.6 ERA. He's only allowed 5 homers this season. So he's kind of built. He's a guy that he misses bats well enough or makes doesn't get barreled up enough to where I think Georgia might have to manufacture some runs. So I just think it is obviously a very intriguing matchup. But again, the last time these two teams played in this setting, it went pretty well for Georgia. So I think it's also, if we're just tying it right back in, we said this last week, great for Kirby Smart to get all these guys in with an even bigger setting for baseball. Getting to watch this is not something Kirby's been able to have any recruits experience. And so I think having Foley Field just cranked up to its highest decibel level will probably pay off for multiple sports this weekend.
Georgia men's basketball minute before we get out of here. Last week, Georgia signed 3-star combo guard Jordan Key, another kid out of Florida, 6'4", 170. I thought this was a move that made a lot of sense for Georgia. Very low risk, adding a guard that, not the most talented, not the highest rated, but adds something to the backcourt. And, watching out, I think Georgia's going to add one more scholarship player before it's said and done. I think we should get clarity on that in the next probably week or so. And then I would expect them to add, or what I should say is I expect them to put one of the walk-ons on scholarship. So I think that they should be set and should have all of those scholarships filled getting ready for 24-25. And I'd be remiss not to mention that on Tuesday, it was made official that Georgia will be playing St. John's in the Bahamas. Have a chance to go down there, Mike White versus Rick Pitino. And fellas, I'm looking for a photographer. Anyone volunteering to go with me and make this trip to the Bahamas?
I've got a camera already, so I might as well I'll just take care of it. I think I saw Kevin said potentially that he wants you to rent a boat while you're down there. Did I see that? Those are his words, not mine.
I mean, that's what the boss man said. And they need to understand I am one that takes orders. I do not push back. I say, look, if this is what you want me to do, I'll do it. Will I have a smile on my face? I'm not so sure. But, I just watch out for all our subscribers. I want to make sure they're taken care of.
Absolutely. I mean, hey, Georgia St. John's is going to be as big of a game that day as any. I haven't looked at the schedule, but I got to imagine it's up there.
We're going to wrap up the episode right now. 2 MVPs of this episode. One, Ben Wolk, for really just battling it out. I mean, I would have given up. The phone would have been in the parking lot. But the second one is Craig Lawson, who just killing us in the comments. We couldn't read half of what he told us or we would not have jobs on Wednesday, but he definitely kept it interesting. But want to shout out both you guys. Want to make sure and tell everybody to go to Dawgs247.com if you haven't already. Go subscribe, make sure you're signed up, especially like we said, this is going to be another big recruiting weekend, and Ben and Kipp will have you covered when it comes to the recruiting side of things. But also subscribe. We've got all kinds of team content as we go through the rest of the summer. Media days will be here before you know it, and there will be a lot of intrigue and a lot of fun conversations out of that. Go to Dawgs247 on YouTube, subscribe there. We got all these podcast episodes, all the Kirby Smart press conferences from back in the spring, and then once we get into fall camp, they'll be there as well. And Dawgs247 on TikTok, got all kinds of content there. We'll have some more videos in the days to come. So for Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care.